a lot of our media guys in Denver, and a lot of others at LSU today for their Alabama presser on a Monday. I think that maybe they had the inkling of what was to come, so I'll share some words with you about the Saints and their game last night. First and foremost, I'm not surprised. I thought they'd lose the game. Secondly, I was surprised by the margin of defeat because they really were not competitive, and I was surprised. The Saints have had the season to forget, and a season of just unbelievable difficulty that anyone can ever endure. And it just continues watching Jonathan Vilma and Will Smith play last night. They have another new coach this week, and a lot of people thought that might be a positive thing, and I think it is going to be a positive on a long-term basis, but it still underscores what they've gone through this year. Change, change, change. And it's very, very difficult to deal with that from a player's perspective, keeping in mind that they have a new defensive coordinator and a new defensive scheme to begin with, and that obviously isn't working, and it's not so much a reflection on the coach as it is on the players, because you have a record-setting trend that is continuing from a defensive perspective. This team has now given up 400 yards or more in each of their games. They've given up 500 yards in more than half of those games, which is remarkable. And they're on a pace to be one of the top 3 worst defenses in the history of the National Football League in terms of yards allowed. And in terms of points allowed, right now they'd be in the top 10 all time. So this is no surprise. They faced a team that is a good football team, a team that was at home, a team that is playing well. And as you go back and look at the game, several things certainly come to mind. Look, the better team won by far. That's clear. They established and won the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball, and that's clear. One team can run the ball and run it extensively against you, and you either can't run it or won't run it, or are too far behind to run it against them, and you saw the result. People want to make a lot about Drew Brees not having a particularly good game, and he wasn't that accurate, but he didn't have a whole lot of help. There were 4 drops. He had pressure on a regular basis, and of course he found himself playing from behind very frequently in that game, as has been the case much of the year. To see the Saints be that unproductive on offense was a surprise, but this basically in a Halloween season was your worst nightmare. Sooner or later, your offense is not going to perform up to those standards and average nearly 30 points a game and throw for 340-plus yards a game. You just can't do that every week. It's not going to happen. And this happened to be that week where it didn't happen, and you saw the result. They got beat, and they got beat in demonstrative fashion by a good team. Frankly, the team they'd beaten previously weren't very good. And this team that they played last night is good and getting better, and obviously the Saints weren't equipped to handle that. Personnel-wise, they tried a few different things. I'm sure you probably took note that Tom Johnson and Akeem Hicks played extensively. One of them started, and they played much of the game inside defensively. Hicks has a chance to be a good player. As you saw, he forced a turnover early in the game. He had 2 other penetrations in the first half that disrupted plays, and he had a tackle for a loss in the second half. He's pretty gifted physically, and for the rest of the season, I really think that that's what the Saints should do, is play guys of that nature and give them an opportunity to find out if they can play, because it's pretty clear that the guys you have otherwise cannot play. It's that simple. And then from the standpoint of schemes and doing what they're doing defensively, they simply don't have the players to do it. People that were negative about Greg Williams probably understand why he did what he did now in attack, because he's trying to cover up for the obvious weaknesses on the backside of that defense, because their secondary has a lot of weaknesses, and their safeties simply are not good. They don't cover well, they don't react well. Roman Harper tackles well, but he's basically a player that needs to play in the box to be effective, and that's not really the way they're using him to a large degree, at least at this point. I think Steve Spagnuolo is a good coach, but you have to have good players to be able to succeed, and we'll see if they're able to retool that eventually. Otherwise, I mean, there were some circumstances in the game that were pretty interesting in terms of things that were done. A lot was made of the Saints going for it, on 4th and 2, right around midfield in the second quarter or first quarter, early second quarter of a tied football game, and they did not make it. Well, first and foremost, you feel pretty good that you got a play that will work there. I actually called the play before it happened with the little arrow route that Lance Moore likes to run, where apparently Denver felt the same way. They did a good job of covering that and stopping the play. Denver, of course, proceeds to go down the field and score, and the Saints, of course, never were in it after that. Denver never looked back. That said, in that situation, I had no problem with the Saints going for it at all. Their defense, as poor as they are, you give the ball back to Peyton Manning, and they're going to score whether they start from their own 2, which we saw, or from near midfield, which we saw. Bottom line is, the only way you're going to win that game is to score points. So every opportunity you have, you should be trying to score points. I was a little bit puzzled before the half why the Saints were not calling timeout. When Denver had the ball, they could have called timeout with 42 seconds left and had at least some time on the clock to give Drew Brees the ball with an opportunity at altitude to drive into field goal position, because at altitude you add 5 to 10 yards to your field goal kick opportunities. So if normally Garrett Hartley is good out to 52, in Denver he'll be good out to 57 or 58, but they did not give themselves that opportunity by not calling any timeouts prior to halftime. Some people have sent the emails and comments overnight this morning that why were the Saints so flat? I don't know that they were flat. I just think that they got beat by a better team that really found its groove in that second half against San Diego, and they just carried it over. And New Orleans did not play well, and you saw the result. People asked about Mark Ingram, and they continue to ask about Mark Ingram. And I don't have an answer for you. The coaches see guys every day. They obviously feel that this guy has the ability to contribute and play, and that's why he's active, and Chris Ivory is not. I'm not a coach, just an observer like you are. That said, if you look at productivity, it's clearly not there from the standpoint of Ingram being the quote-unquote power back. We know what Chris Ivory has the capability of doing. We know he has some ball security issues, but again, we don't know everything because we're not in those rooms every day and we're not on the fields every day. Therefore, it's one of those situations where you have to trust in their evaluations. That said, I think clearly the touches need to go to Pierre Thomas, who's a multi-purpose back who does everything pretty well, and Darren Sproles, who's a playmaker. Clearly is a guy that gives a defense serious accountability issues. The receivers last night, frankly, did not do a very good job of creating separation. You saw many, many times where Brees looked, pumped again, couldn't find anybody, and ended up under pressure and duress, sacked, or throwing the ball away because he couldn't find people. And then you had some drops, as I mentioned, as well. Jimmy Graham caught a touchdown. Great to see him back on the field. He also dropped a couple of passes, and clearly he's not 100% yet. But we know what kind of player he is. Marcus Colston's played on a bad foot all season long. It's clear he's not moving as good as he normally does straight away, but he's still a productive player. And Lance Moore had a great game the week before, not so much last night, but we know he's a good player. Bottom line, look, they're 2-5. You can't put the season to bed yet because 5 losses does not end the season by any stretch of the imagination. But the schedule has gotten a lot tougher. They got Philadelphia coming in this week, and that's an average team with quarterback issues. They don't even know who's going to start this week, and as a result, we'll see. But the Saints at home should be able to win that football game, in my estimation. Let me put it this way. If they don't, and you can stick a fork in this season because the schedule gets significantly more difficult after that. And from the standpoint of the rest of this season, look, I don't see them having a winning season. I don't see them making the playoffs at this stage. It's simply a matter of evaluation, progress, getting the coach back, hopefully getting a draft pick or two that you can make a difference with, and then being able to move forward and try to improve upon some of the things you need to improve upon. And Lord knows there are lots of those things at this point. So with that, I'll take any questions about the Saints from last night or even moving forward if anybody has any. Yes, sir?
I was watching the Falcons game before in the afternoon, and I was really impressed by how their defense is really what's making them win those games.
Well, what the Falcons have done on defense, if you watch them play at all, they've made a conscious effort to match up with the Saints, first and foremost, with their drafting and their player acquisition. And that's all about matching up front with speed rushers and on the backside with cover guys. I think they've done a really good job in that regard. They have a lot of speed on defense. I was kind of surprised they let Curtis Lofton get away because, frankly, Lofton is the one good player on the Saints defense. He plays sideline to sideline, leads them in tackles, and has been very solid for them. He's probably better than Vilma would be at that position. But as you saw, the Saints played both of them together last night. Commend them for that. They had Shanley inactive, and they tried to play Vilma outside. Of course, it's not a natural position for him, but the thought process of trying to fix something that's totally broken was a good thought process, and trying to get your best players on the field at the same time. But the Atlanta defense runs extremely well. That's what I'm most impressed with the guys they have on the defensive side. And they will create problems for you. You have to use that against them and run a lot of misdirection and influence and fakes and screens and things of that nature to at least give them some cause for pause when they're coming after you. And of course, offensively, Matt Ryan's playing at his highest level right now that he's played in the NFL. I thought he really leveled off last year. I wasn't very impressed with where he was or where their offense was, but now you see Julio Jones as a second-year player making big plays. He's enormously talented physically, and they already had two other good receivers and a Hall of Fame tight end to go along with that. Offensive line has played pretty well. Their kicking game's been very good. So, listen, they're legitimate. They've earned it, and where they're at right now, and they're definitely a very serious contender to make the Super Bowl.
We think their best player off their team.
They get better, huh? Yeah, I don't know if he was their best player, but he was good, and I was surprised. Oh, I think he's clearly the best player on defense.
That just tells me how far different the defense is.
Oh, and I think, again, not here to glorify Greg Williams or the previous regime, but I think you understand now why the Saints did what they did on defense and their philosophy. I still didn't like what they did on the last series against San Francisco last year. There's a time and a place for that, but I think you understand why he played the way he played. I mean, the best defense is a pass rush. The best way to hide the backside, if you're not very good back there, is to hide it by getting to the quarterback and causing him to get rid of the ball quickly or putting him on the ground. And that was their philosophy. And they weren't one of the league's better defenses. We all know about the Super Bowl season and the incredible number of turnovers that the Saints created. But even in the 2010 season, go back and look at it. They were ranked 13th in the league on defense. For the Saints, that's all you need. And last year, they were a little bit lower than that, but they were still decent. This year, obviously, they're nowhere near that. They have no chance to win with the way they play defense this year. No chance.
With the trade deadline tomorrow, who do you see as someone tradable, and what position do you think we should shore up?
Well, in terms of tradable, running back. I mean, look at your running back position right away. You've got Travis Cadet, who nobody's going to trade for him because he's a free agent rookie, but he could be a guy that figures in your future plans. Chris Ivory clearly is, people have seen him play, and he was your leading rusher 2 years ago. This is a guy that has physical ability, and you got a lot of tape on him to see that he can play. And then, of course, you got Ingram, if he's got any value. Sproles and Thomas aren't going anywhere, but I think that's one position from the standpoint of having a plethora of players that you could possibly make a deal from. From the extent of what you were trying to acquire, if you were trying to acquire anything, I don't know, just name any position on defense and you'd be just about fine, other than Lofton. Yes?
Yeah, Ken, I got a prep question concerning the redistricting and the LHSAA.
Yeah.
What direction do you think LHSAA is going to cut it off? And do you think the Catholic League, considering a lot of us come from the Catholic League background, including yourself, do you think Holy Cross will eventually just decide maybe it's better not to move up to 5A? And how do you see the lay of the land as far as
Well, several components there, and I know we've got a few minutes left, so it won't be long, but from the standpoint of what's happening with the LHSAA, they have passed an amendment to allow schools to play up one classification only as of the upcoming school year, not this school year, but next school year, which begins in August of next year. So you can play up one class. Therefore, if you're 2A, you can play up to 3A. If you're 3A, you can play to 4A, and so forth. But you can't play up all the way, as we've seen in previous years, like Evangel did, playing up to 5A, like John Curtis did, playing up to 4A. And what happened in 2004, stopping teams from playing up, or schools from playing up in classification, was a direct shot at both Evangel and John Curtis. Make no mistake about it. It was simply geared at these two, and it was prejudicial, and it was clearly discriminatory against those two because people didn't want to play them and didn't think they could compete with them and thought they had unfair playing advantages. And it doesn't make any difference whether you feel that's true or not. That's what happened. And it's really impacted. What they didn't understand was two things. Number one, it's had no impact on John Curtis at all. They're probably better now than they've ever been. And it's really had no impact on Evangel. Look at the record and what they've accomplished. So they didn't hurt those guys. They have hurt 1A and 2A schools because Evangel played 1A for a couple of years and just killed people. Now they're up to 2A with Curtis, and who's got a chance to win that? Curtis or Evangel have won it every year since they've been together. One or the other has won it, and they played each other for it on a couple of occasions, and it wouldn't be a surprise if they ended up playing each other again this year. The other component that you mentioned about the Catholic schools, they will all play together next year. Archbishop Shaw will play up to 5A, St. Augustine will play up to 5A, and Holy Cross will play up to 5A to join Jesuit, Rummel and Brother Martin, and create that league that people are so fond of. And I think, for one, and of course I grew up in that as these guys did, it's a very positive thing, because you want to be with like institutions. How stupid is it that John Aaron and West Jefferson are in different districts? And they're a mile apart, seriously? And they're playing in different leagues? That's because you have influence peddling and you allow people to come into the process and dictate what's going to happen. One principal protested the fact that he didn't want to be in the league they were putting him in, and it caused a complete domino effect where things changed radically, and now you've got neighboring schools, one of which was formed out of another, that are in the same classification, a mile apart, playing in different districts. That's just absolutely ludicrous. What needs to happen is these Catholic schools need to play together when the rule takes effect, and the Jefferson Parish Public School League needs to get back together. East Jefferson will be on the borderline between 4A and 5A. I hope they make 5A classification. They've got a real good team, and they should be playing with Bonneville, and West Jefferson, and Higgins, John Eric, and creating that Jefferson Parish Public School League, which could then include Chalmette, who clearly doesn't want to continue playing with the Catholic schools. And then across the board, just moving forward, the last comment about that is, I think you need to, appeals are great. I think it's the country we live in, the process we have, and it brings about fairness, but I think you have to be very careful about the politics of everything when you allow somebody to create a situation like I just spoke of, where you have neighboring schools not even playing in the same district. It's just crazy. The whole concept of districting is about geography. And because somebody didn't want to play with who he wanted to play with, they weighted that and took it into consideration, and it messed everything up. Because right now you also have a district in 5A that includes schools from Lafourche Parish playing schools that are from the Lafayette area. Now think about that in every sport. It's not just football. It's boys and girls basketball, it's volleyball, it's softball, it's baseball, it's tennis, it's whatever sports you have, golf, wrestling, name it. You got to travel on those buses. Put your kids on those buses and travel an hour to 2 hours to play games on a regular basis. Think about the disruption of the school day. Think about safety issues, and that's what you created. But the biggest problem of all is that they have 5 classes. They should never have gone to 5 classes. You have watered-down districts. District championships don't mean anything anymore. And you have these travel situations that don't make sense. If you had 4 classes, that would not be the case. Last one, ready?
In 3 minutes or less, would you and Mr. Hodges explain Mr. Tagliabue being appointed as the person to oversee the Saints' suspensions?
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. I'll let Norman talk to that because he's probably better equipped to say it. But well, let me say one thing about it, and I'll let Norman say a word, and then we'll wrap up. I think Tagliabue, people need to remember in New Orleans that Tagliabue was largely responsible for saving the New Orleans Saints. He stepped up at a time when this franchise was in serious peril, when there was a real chance that this franchise could move. And as commissioner of the league, he basically said, you cannot do that. I was in Baton Rouge when the Saints were playing none other than the Miami Dolphins and Nick Saban at the time, when the Saints were playing at Tiger Stadium. And Tagliabue held a press conference, and he basically told us that and made sure that people understood that on my watch, this isn't going to happen. And all that people here wanted was an opportunity to get back on their feet and show that they loved and cared about this franchise and would support this team. We've seen the result, obviously, but Tagliabue really stepped up when this franchise needed him, and that should be remembered. So I'll give him kudos for that, and New Orleans has certainly a debt of gratitude owed to him. With regard to the legal matter, Norman?
Legal matter. Yeah, I practice law because I stayed a Holiday Inn Select last night, so I take whatever degree I need to have to answer the question. Clearly, without a doubt, the NFL is making these decisions. These are not decisions made by one guy to name Tagliabue as the replacement. If you don't believe that there is a group of owners that are making every decision all the way down the line, we're talking about a $15 billion annual business, and they're not going to allow their general manager, so to speak, of this NFL franchise to make any changes without that. So understand where what they say when they look at criminal cases, follow the money. These guys understand where the money is and so forth. Now, there's 2 sides of this. There's a collective bargaining agreement that the Players Association signed with the NFL. And that agreement gives the commissioner full control to make these decisions, right? Now, we all know our players, Saints players, are arguing as if it's a real court of law, so to speak. I don't want to offend any of you attorneys in here, but as if it's a real court of law. You know, it's a mock trial, if you will, and the commissioner is going to make that decision. But I assure you, he's got full backing of the NFL, either the executive committee or all the owners collectively. So understanding that is where we're coming from. The players, if I'm on the other side, if I'm a player, I'm going to do exactly what they're doing. I'm going to keep fighting, even though some of them, you know, Hargrove is probably out of the league for right now and may stay out. It looks like, you know, Fajita is his career because of the neck injury. He could be questionable. I think Vilma's clearly on the downside of his career, which we all go through, right? That's just part of the deal. So these guys are fighting more for their name recognition in the community and getting their name cleared from this program. Now, Tagliabue, I mean, once again, that's just Ryan and I taking a step off. You know, Ryan replaced me, so I can't do it anymore. So I just get Ryan to come back and he fills the bill. And clearly his law firm is handling the NFL's activities, so it's all part of the process. If you really want to resolve the issue, we being the Player Association, which I'm a member and fairly involved, and the commissioner who is representing the NFL owners, I mean, that's all it's here. If you really want to resolve it, obviously you go to what? Attorneys do it all the time. They go to an arbitrator, right? They get a third-party arbitrator. Both folks agree on who their arbitrator is going to be, and to me, that's resolved. But I don't think that they're at that point. I also know when you negotiate, you don't give up your position till you absolutely have to give it up, and I think that's where they are. They don't absolutely have to give up either position yet. So Vilma and that group are still petitioning the courts for hearings and whatever they do in that process. And I think the commissioner is saying, well, I'll throw an olive branch out and I'll name the former commissioner whose law firm is handling the practice. So that's a roundabout way of saying everything that you already know in the process. But I think until you get to that point where a decision has to be made, I don't know, I'm not sure exactly when that is, but whenever that point is reached is when they're going to finally get somebody that can make a decision. And I don't think it'll be Tagliabue. I don't think it's going to be the current commissioner. I don't think it's going to be anybody that's an owner. I think they're going to appoint somebody else to come in as maybe a judge, as an arbitrator, and agree with that. I don't know if that answers it or not, but. Well, yeah, he really can in one way. Two is Tom Benson. He doesn't say much anyway, right? And so he's going to keep close to the vest, and he's going to keep everything in his pocket. One. Two is that he's in that ownership group, and they're not going to mess up $50 billion of annual revenue. They're just not going to do that. So they've assigned the commissioner as their lead spokesperson. The collective bargaining agreement says he's got these rights and duties based on the allegations that are in front of the commissioner. If you notice, the Players Association who negotiated that, right? And quite frankly, I haven't heard much from them. Very little. It's all Vilma's and the other players' attorneys petitioning the courts, I think, on a local basis. So that's telling me that, you know, because usually the Players Association, I assure you, if they think that it's way out of whack, I mean, they're holding press conferences and filing. They're sort of taking a secondary role with that. So it just tells me that they're not quite to that point where they're going to make a final decision.
Thanks to everyone once again.